Part 1. A Promise, a Pulled Curtain. The year was 1818, and the season in London felt less like a celebration of youth and more like a carefully orchestrated military campaign, with eligible daughters as the troops and advantageous alliances as the spoils. For Lady Mercy Wainwright, the entire exercise felt quite chill, though the drawing-rooms were undoubtedly warm. Mercy, at 20 years of age, possessed a beauty that was less a flash of summer lightning and more the quiet, steady luminescence of a winter moon. She was precisely what an ambitious family wished for, impeccably bred, perfectly trained, and possessed of a calm, almost mournful resignation to her fate. That fate, it had been made clear since she was old enough to hold a needle, was to marry. Not merely well, but strategically. Her father, the Earl of Ashworth, possessed a title that was long, but coffers that were regrettably shallow. Their salvation, and the bolstering of the fragile northern alliance the Crown desperately needed, rested solely on Mercy's eventual union with Prince Alaric of Aldoria. Alaric. The name itself was a chime of duty. He was a man known more for his intellect and grim competence than for the easy charm of a fashionable gentleman. The Crown Prince was, in short, a man destined to rule a cold kingdom, and Mercy was the woman destined to stand beside him, a cool, steady hand to match his own. Love, in this equation, was not only unnecessary, but quite likely an inconvenient distraction. "You must stand in the light, Mercy," her mother commanded from the chaise longue, her tone sharpened by the exhaustion of maintaining a cheerful facade. "Prince Alaric is to be in attendance this evening. A pale gown is charming, but you must not allow yourself to be mistaken for a mere decoration." Mercy offered a dutiful, faint smile. She was dressed in the approved Eldorian colour, a sombre, heavy sapphire satin that weighed upon her as much as her duty did. Her only refuge in the whirl of courtly demands was the small, quiet space behind the scenes, and the company of her housemaid, Rosa. Rosa was a girl of exactly Mercy's age, but there the resemblance ended. Where Mercy was pale and reserved, Rosa was a blaze of unexpected colour. Her hair was the deep, rich brown of wet earth, and her eyes, large and startlingly golden brown, held an awareness that belied her low station. She was not beautiful in the refined, prescribed way of the aristocracy. Her beauty was fierce and untamed, like a sudden wildflower pushing through cobblestones. Mercy's mother insisted on bringing Rosa everywhere, arguing that the Eldorian court valued an impeccably dressed lady, and Rosa was a genius with hairpins, stitches, and the arrangement of silk. "We go as shadows, Rosa," Mercy whispered that evening as the carriage rattled toward the Royal Assembly rooms. "You to preserve my appearance, and I to preserve the family's future." "And a dismal purpose for a beautiful night, my lady," Rosa murmured, adjusting a pearl drop on Mercy's bodice with a practiced hand. Her voice was low and melodic, carrying a hint of an unfamiliar accent, a whisper of the outside world that Mercy knew only from books. The Royal Assembly was a spectacle of blinding light and stifling heat. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, beeswax, and nervous ambition. Mercy took her place near the dowagers, a designated waiting spot where she could be observed without appearing too eager. She observed the scene with practiced detachment. The prince was a tall, imposing figure, moving through the crowd with an air of profound distance. He acknowledged the usual suspects with brief nods, his expression never wavering from its polite neutrality. He was a man entirely enclosed by his position. It was while Mercy stood in the recess of a long velvet-poled curtain, awaiting her mother's signal for a strategic pass by the Eldorian envoy, that the scene unfolded. Rosa, having been sent to fetch Mercy a glass of water, a modest escape from the champagne, was navigating the edge of the ballroom. She held the crystal glass carefully, her focus purely on keeping her task. Prince Alaric, mid-conversation with a flustered duke, stopped abruptly. He was not looking at the duke's daughter, or the glittering diamonds on the duchess' neck, but directly at Rosa. The prince's dark gaze, usually so impenetrable, possessed a sudden, sharp clarity as it fell upon the housemaid. He finished his sentence to the duke with mechanical precision, then turned and began to move, not toward the waiting political figures, but across the floor, cutting a swath through the tulle and silk. Mercy's breath caught. This was not the prince she had been briefed on. This was a man with a singular, immediate intent. He reached Rosa near a pillar draped with heavy brocade. Rosa, startled by his proximity, offered a curtsy, awkward as she was holding the glass, and lowered her eyes. "Careful, girl," the prince said, his voice reaching Mercy as a low, clear tone across the hushed moment. It was not a question, nor a command. It was a simple, blunt observation. Rosa lifted her head, and Mercy watched the two of them connect in a gaze that seemed to freeze the chaos of the room around them. It was a look that contained neither flirtation nor fear, but a strange mutual recognition, a spark of something shared across the vast chasm of their stations. "My apologies, Your Highness," she managed, her composure returning swiftly. "I was careless." The prince's lips curled into the slightest of smiles, a gesture so rare that it utterly transformed his severe face, lending him a sudden, devastating handsomeness. It was a smile that no one in the room, certainly no one in the diplomatic circle, had ever witnessed. A pulled curtain can often hide more than it reveals, the prince said cryptically. He reached into his coat and produced a coin, not a common shilling, but an old, heavy piece of gold, dull with age and beautifully struck. He pressed it into the palm of the housemaid, his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second too long. "Take this, for your trouble," he murmured, his eyes holding hers firmly. The gesture was both generous and utterly improper. Rosa stared at the gold coin in her hand, utterly bewildered, then looked up again, her golden brown eyes wide with a question she dared not voice. The prince simply nodded, a farewell that felt strangely personal, and then turned, re-entering the stream of conversation as if the interlude had never occurred. Mercy, hidden by the velvet folds, felt a coldness settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This single, silent exchange held more life, more intrigue than 3 seasons of her carefully constructed political existence. When Rosa returned to the curtain, her hands were trembling, not from fright, but from an undeniable surge of bewilderment. "My lady, I do not understand," Rosa whispered, carefully drawing back the heavy sapphire curtain to let Mercy step out. In the subtle light of the recess, Mercy took Rosa's wrist and gently opened her palm. Resting on the calloused skin was the prince's coin. It was indeed old gold, and the light caught the deeply etched crest upon it. It was not the standard recognizable Eldorian royal seal. This crest was an intricate design of a coiled serpent crowned by a single five-pointed star, a sigil Mercy vaguely remembered seeing in her father's forgotten texts, a symbol of a disgraced, historical royal branch thought to have been eradicated a century ago, a secret crest. Mercy's heart, long dormant, gave a sharp, uncomfortable lurch. The prince had not merely spared an insult for her housemaid, he had shared a secret. Part 2. Servants' Secrets. The subsequent days were not a continuation of the London season, but a quiet, agonizing pause for Lady Mercy Wainwright. The sapphire gown and the royal assembly were behind her, yet the impression of the scene, Prince Alaric's rare smile, the ancient gold coin, and Rosa's bewildered eyes, was etched sharply into her memory. Mercy found herself haunted by an awareness she had never sought, that her future husband, the cold, dutiful Prince of Eldoria, possessed a hidden vein of passion, and that this passion was directed not at the political match awaiting him, but at the housemaid who ironed her petticoats. The coin remained hidden, tucked away in Mercy's small private desk, examined only when Rosa was occupied with her tasks. Mercy's knowledge of historical heraldry was not extensive, but the image of the coiled serpent, crowned by a single star, was unsettlingly familiar. She spent hours in the dusty confines of her father's library, ostensibly reading French poetry, but in truth tracing the history of Eldorian cadet branches. Her investigation confirmed her unease. The crest belonged to the House of Valerius, a lineage purged from the succession rolls after a failed rebellion over a century ago. They were considered extinct, or more accurately, erased. The mere possession of this coin was treasonous in some circles, or deeply sentimental in others. As the days turned into a week, Mercy began to observe the small, almost invisible exchanges between the prince and Rosa. She noticed small mercies, glances that lasted a breath too long when the prince called upon the earl for political discussions. Once, at a grand equestrian show, when Mercy was presented to the prince, his reply to her polite courtesy was distractedly brief, his attention momentarily fixed on Rosa, who was standing discreetly behind a pillar holding Mercy's shawl. Later, Rosa found a single exotic white orchid pressed into the folds of that shawl, a flower that did not grow in England, but was the national emblem of Eldoria's south. The gifts were never diamonds or gold, they were acts of quiet, profound recognition. "He sees you, Rosa," Mercy finally murmured one afternoon, catching Rosa gazing at the orchid. Rosa flushed deeply, the colour rising from her throat to her hairline. "It is only pity, my lady. I am a curiosity to him, nothing more." "Curiosities do not earn the seal of the House of Valerius," Mercy countered, her voice low and steady. She closed the library door and walked toward Rosa, holding the drawing of the serpent and star crest she had copied. Rosa's golden brown eyes widened, fixed on the drawing. All pretense of the dutiful housemaid fell away, replaced by an expression of shock and deep-seated fear. "How do you know this?" Rosa whispered, her hands clenched tightly on the delicate lace she was mending. "I know that the prince gave you the coin, and I know that what he gave you is not a payment, but a claim. Tell me, Rosa, who are you?" The confrontation, conducted in the dusty quiet of the library, was Mercy's first true act of rebellion against the prescribed order of her life. She was stepping away from her role as the dutiful fiancée to become an investigator of the heart. Rosa broke. She sank onto a small stool, covering her face. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her expression held a sudden fierce pride. "My mother served your grandfather, my lady. She was a waiting woman, discreet, educated in the continental style," Rosa began, her voice strained. "Before she came to Ashworth, she was known by another name, Alara Valerius, a bastard daughter of the last Count Valerius. My father was never known by me, but my mother, she kept one thing." Rosa moved quickly to her meagre trunk in the servants' quarters. She pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket and placed it in Mercy's hand. Inside was a tiny, faded miniature portrait of a man with Alaric's severe bone structure and his specific, dark eyes. He was an Eldorian diplomat passing through years ago. His name was Alaric Valerius. He was Crown Prince Alaric's deceased uncle. I am the illegitimate daughter of a forgotten noble line, a bastard cousin to the man you are meant to marry." The revelation struck Mercy with the force of a physical blow. Rosa was not merely a housemaid, she was the ghost of a threat, a loose thread from a dangerous tapestry of history. Rosa was the illegitimate child of a forgotten noble line. This secret, if wielded correctly, could be used as a weapon to destabilize the political match, and worse, destabilize the crown. Mercy realized the gravity of the prince's gesture. He did not merely find Rosa appealing, he was actively recognizing a relationship, however distant or informal, by giving her the Valerius seal. He was either terribly reckless or moving with a calculated, desperate purpose. Mercy sought out the prince at a formal luncheon hosted at the Eldorian embassy. She used a minor social inquiry to draw him aside into the conservatory, where the humidity mirrored the sudden tension between them. "Your Highness," Mercy began, foregoing all pleasantries, "I believe you are acquainted with the historical relevance of the Valerius crest." The Prince Alaric's composure, usually granite-like, fractured for a moment. He studied Mercy, not with the distant respect he reserved for his fiancée, but with sharp, focused intelligence. "I am acquainted, Lady Mercy. It is an old family mark, now defunct, a historical footnote." "I do not believe you treat historical footnotes with such deliberate sentiment. Your Highness, I know who Rosa is." Alaric was silent for a long moment. He did not deny it. "And what do you intend to do with this knowledge, Lady Mercy? You are pledged to my duty." "I am pledged to the stability of the alliance," Mercy corrected, meeting his gaze. "But I cannot pledge myself to a man who, out of sentiment or recklessness, would risk the entire arrangement for a secret that could be used against us." The prince finally leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. "I mistake sentiment for necessity, Lady Mercy. I am not reckless. I am trapped. The Minister of Succession, Lord Fels, is obsessed with consolidating power. He fears the legitimacy of my mother's line. I need a distraction, an internal controversy that seems to resolve itself, drawing Fels' attention away from the real threats to the throne. And you mean to use Rosa for this? Mercy asked, horrified. No, the prince said, his eyes bleak. Fels is looking for any means to manipulate the succession. I must know who else might possess this knowledge, or if Fels is already manufacturing a rival claim to discredit me. Mercy was forced to reveal her discovery. Then you must know, Your Highness, that someone is already moving. Rosa's claim is now a topic of hushed conversation in the servants' hall. It is a whisper waiting to be shouted. The three are woven into a conspiracy to disinherit a rival. The conspiracy coalesced 3 days later. A courier arrived at the Earl of Ashworth's house with a document that chilled Mercy to the bone. It was addressed to the Earl as the Prince's known ally, seemingly delivered by a disgruntled Eldorian clerk. Mercy, recognizing the script from her research, knew its importance immediately. It was a sealed testament. She broke the seal herself, ignoring the etiquette that would have waited for her father. The document was a bombshell. It was a purported amendment to the Eldorian succession laws, dated shortly before the last Count Valerius was executed, explicitly naming the Count's illegitimate line as the rightful heirs should the current royal line fail. The document was complex, detailing a convoluted, centuries-old law regarding the purity of the blood. If legitimate, it would not place Rosa first in line, but it would give her a significant, highly contentious claim, enough to make her a formidable political pawn. Mercy read the last line with dawning horror. It was written in a modern hand, signed not by the deceased Count, but by Minister Lord Fels himself, disguised with a complex, period-accurate script, yet betrayed by a tiny, modern flourish only visible to the keen eye. The testament was a meticulous, dangerous forgery. Lord Fels had not been looking for a distraction. He had been manufacturing the exact claim he needed. By introducing this forged document, he intended to either 1. Force the prince to marry Mercy immediately to stabilize the political situation, or 2. Use the controversy surrounding the Valerius claim, i.e. Rosa, to discredit the prince's own competence and morality, thereby clearing the way for Fels to install a puppet ruler. Mercy was standing in the center of a political minefield. She now held the evidence of Rosa's claim, and the evidence that the claim was forged by the powerful Minister of Succession to manipulate the line. She had to make a choice, and the prince's trust now rested entirely on her next move. The fate of the Eldorian alliance and Rosa's life were no longer a matter of protocol, but of treason and truth. Part 3. The Crown's Choice. The sealed testament, sitting heavy upon Mercy's desk like a harbinger of war, had stripped away all the polite veneer of courtly romance. The game was no longer about securing a rich husband. It was about exposing treason and protecting a vulnerable girl, and perhaps protecting the integrity of the Eldorian crown itself. The choice that confronted Lady Mercy Wainwright was stark, unforgiving, and historical in its weight. Option A. Duty. She could destroy the forged testament, push Rosa away, and reveal only the initial rumor of the Valerius line to the prince. This would achieve the desired stability. The Crown Prince, having eliminated the minor scandal, would be free to proceed with the marriage alliance, securing her family's fortunes and the stability of the realm. It was the path of prescribed obedience and reward. Option B. Truth. She could risk everything: her family's honor, her engagement, her very reputation, by exposing Minister Fell's using the forged document. This would destabilize the government, put Rosa in the direct line of Fell's vengeance, and force Crown Prince Alaric to confront his own suppressed desires in front of the entire court. It was the path of justice and love, but paved with unpredictable chaos. The quiet resolve that had always defined Mercy now crystallized into courage. She looked at the forged seal and thought of Rosa's fierce, untamed beauty and the rare, transformative smile the prince had offered her in the ballroom. She thought of her own life, a carefully folded piece of paper, waiting to be signed and sealed. She realized that living a life of perpetual sacrifice for a cause based on lies was no life at all. Mercy chose the truth. The opportunity arose at the Eldorian Winter Gala, a final, high-stakes gathering designed to celebrate the imminent Anglo-Eldorian alliance. The atmosphere was charged with formality, tension, and the minister's arrogant confidence. Mercy sought out the prince first, pulling him into the hushed privacy of the library, the very room where she had first discovered Rosa's truth. "I have it, Your Highness," she stated, without preamble, laying the forged document on a mahogany table between them. Alaric read the document quickly, his face darkening with controlled fury as he recognized the meticulous fraud and the dangerous extent of Fell's ambition. He saw that the forgery was designed to force his hand, binding him to a marriage he did not desire, while simultaneously setting up a legitimate threat for the future. "You realize what you have done, Lady Mercy. This evidence is treasonous. For exposing this, you risk your own reputation and the marriage we require." "I risk what is necessary for the truth, Your Highness," Mercy replied, her chin lifted. "I was raised to believe stability was paramount, but stability built on injustice is merely a handsome lie. You do not wish to marry me, and you cannot secure your throne by allowing a traitor to dictate your choices." She looked him directly in the eye, the dutiful fiancée finally shedding her political skin. "You must choose. Your duty to the throne is paramount, yes, but your duty to truth and to your own heart is what will ultimately define your rule." She then revealed the full extent of Fell's plot and the danger Rosa was in. If Fell's is exposed, Rosa will be vulnerable. He will attempt to silence the legitimate claim of the Valerius line, however faint, to eliminate all future trouble. Alaric looked at the portrait of the stern, dutiful woman he had been trained to marry, and saw instead a woman of unforeseen courage and moral clarity. He saw the fire that her duty had long suppressed. "Thank you, Lady Mercy," he said, his voice husky with genuine emotion, a tenderness he had never shown her before. "You have given me the weapon I needed, and the freedom I did not dare to claim." The ballroom was a sea of glittering expectations. Lord Fell's, confident in his trap, was already circulating, subtly whispering about the Valerius scandal and the fragility of the prince's judgment. The moment came during the final waltz. Just before the official toast to the alliance, Prince Alaric stepped onto the dais, not to raise his glass, but to address the assembly in a voice that cut through the music and chatter. "My lords and ladies," the prince began, his eyes scanning the room until they rested, briefly, on Lord Fells, who stood frozen by the punch bowl. "I stand here tonight, not merely as the Crown Prince of Eldoria, but as a man who must choose the foundation upon which he shall build his future kingdom. I was pledged to a political alliance, one I respect deeply, embodied by the admirable and impeccable Lady Mercy Wainwright. However, a crown built on necessary lies will inevitably fall to necessary truth," Alaric continued, gripping the edge of the dais. "I have tonight been presented with evidence of an egregious act of treason, a manipulation of the succession laws by a trusted minister intending to destabilize the realm." He did not name Fells, but the implications were clear. Fells began to bluster, but the prince's gaze silenced him. "And secondly, I have been presented with a truth far greater than any diplomatic paper. The realization that the heart of the crown must be honest. I am not choosing the path of convenience tonight. I am choosing the path of conscience." He descended the dais and walked across the floor, bypassing Mercy and the ranks of assembled nobility. He walked straight past the dignitaries, past the diplomats, and through the velvet curtains that led to the servants' passage. A moment later, he returned, leading Rosa by the hand. She was dressed in her simple housemaid's gown, her face pale with terror and confusion, her golden brown eyes wide, but her head still held with that fierce, untamed pride. "This is Rosa, whom I recognize as the descendant of the ancient, erased line of Valerius," the prince announced, his voice ringing with authority. "She is no threat to the crown, but a truth that must be acknowledged and protected from those who would use her. I do not offer her a position in the succession, I offer her protection and my hand." He turned to the court. "I publicly name Rosa my choice." But the prince's sacrifice was yet to be fully paid. Alaric knew that even an illegitimate Valerius claim would provide endless fodder for future rivals. "To prove that this is a choice of love and principle, and not a veiled political grab," the prince declared, looking directly at the diplomatic corps, "I shall resign all contested claims tied to the Valerius line forever. I will stabilize the realm, not by forced marriage, but by removing the controversy entirely. I choose the woman, and I choose stability by surrender." Fells was immediately surrounded by the prince's loyal guards, the shock of his betrayal now overshadowed by the audacity of the prince's devotion. The ballroom erupted into a chaos of gasps and whispers, a grand historical scandal. The subsequent weeks saw the quiet, steady disentanglement of Mercy's life. The alliance was not lost, it was saved. The Earl of Ashworth, initially enraged, realized that Mercy's timely exposure of Fells had saved him from being implicated in treason. The alliance was eventually secured through other means, but the pressure on Mercy was gone. Mercy's sacrifice had not been the ruin of her family, but its quiet salvation. The day Mercy took leave of her family to retreat to their quieter country estate, A true liberation after years in the societal cage, she was met by Prince Alaric. He stood before her, no longer the prospective groom, but a man finally free. "You saved my crown, Lady Mercy, not by marrying me, but by teaching me the difference between necessity and rightness," he admitted, his eyes holding a profound gratitude. "You showed me that a great love is worth risking a great duty," Mercy replied softly. "And you showed me that true beauty is serving truth, even if it costs everything," Alaric concluded. Rosa, now under the quiet protection of the prince and learning to navigate her new, frightening position, approached Mercy. There was no rivalry, only a deep, mutual respect forged in shared secrets and sacrifice. Mercy settled into her new life. She had expected to be miserable, but found instead a quieter, truer purpose. Freed from the rigid requirements of a royal consort, she embraced a life of genuine contribution, managing her family's affairs, investing in local schools, and becoming a figure of quiet, respected influence in her county. Her heart, once dedicated to a loveless pact, was now free to beat for her own true self. She realized that the greatest love story was not the one forced upon her, but the one she had chosen to write, a story of courage, justice, and self-respect. The last letter Mercy received from the newly crowned King Alaric and Queen Rosa was a simple gold pin bearing the image of a single, five-pointed star shorn of the serpent. It was an emblem of stability, truth, and a quiet, profound gratitude. Her choice had stabilized the realm, and in doing so, she had finally found herself.